that we are so often bombarded with, the sound bites that really give us no insight. They only sort of reinforce the baser demons of our nature and our sort of unenlightened perspectives. Whenever I see media actually trying to break through that membrane, push that envelope, and give more insight to the general public when it comes to Islam, global issues, Muslims, it's often the case that this is very helpful in trying to combat Islamophobia and trying to increase mutual understanding between faith communities, between culture, etc. I'm a big fan of the New York Times. That's certainly a media institution that has its dark underbelly, as all of our institutions have theirs. But one example I would give is Laurie Goodstein, who's a reporter for the New York Times. She's one of my favorite journalists in this regard. She recently, it may not be recently now, maybe as much as a year ago, did a series on an Egyptian imam in Brooklyn. I don't know if any of you had seen this series. It was actually a front page, a 3-part front page series on this guy who had traditional Islamic training in Egypt and who was sort of called upon by the Arab Muslim community in Brooklyn because they needed a new imam. And here he was coming to the United States, a very intelligent, very bright guy, but he had to learn English, and of course, he not only had to learn English, he had to learn this strange and new cultural world into which he was coming. And he had to, New York English, Brooklyn, yeah, Brooklyn English at that. And he also had to use a Christian term, he had to minister to or pastor to a diverse community of Arab and non-Arab Muslims, in Brooklyn, who had all sorts of life experiences as immigrants in the United States that were alien to him, or that he was now just beginning to have because he was coming here. And the article was about the serious challenges that any immigrant community faces as it tries to put down roots, in its new home. And it focused particularly on the challenges that Muslim immigrants in the post-September 11th United States are facing. It didn't in any way whitewash over or try to avoid, difficult issues or contentious issues when it comes to questions that people raise about, certain attitudes or perceptions in the Muslim community, either in the United States or Muslim communities. Is she humanized, this community? And so no matter what your perspective was, I think, unless you were really radicalized to the far right or the far left, or one side of the spectrum or the other, I think if you're somewhere in the middle, what you got was a deeper awareness of the human drama that this community was facing. And when we understand each other's humanity, that's the first and most basic step towards deconstructing the stereotypes we have about one another and the negative images and impressions we have about one another. There was also an article, I don't think Laurie Goodstein wrote it, I can't remember, but those of us who have connections with the Gülen Movement saw this article that came out, again, I'm not sure exactly when, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, about the Gülen school in Pakistan. And the article was very interesting because it was juxtaposing certain very sort of what would be described from a Western perspective as radical outlooks that characterize certain interpretations of Islam in Pakistan, and the Gülen school as an Islamic school deeply committed to Islamic values that had a different outlook. Instead of an emphasis on confrontation, an emphasis on mutual understanding and dialogue. And it was a wonderful story about how within the global Muslim community there are the same kind of struggles that there were in that community in Brooklyn, that there are in that community in Brooklyn, as any community tries to grapple with the challenges that besets it. And as good people of goodwill and good intent and who want to pursue the best of our common values, try to deal with and confront the struggles of a world that is torn by conflict and torn by violence. Let me then just briefly say something about the 80% of the time, and what for me sort of characterizes those moments when I feel that media is my greatest foe instead of my greatest ally. I suppose I divide this into sort of three different subcategories. And the first, I think, perhaps represents a large portion of those instances where I feel that media is my greatest foe in combating Islamophobia, or our greatest foe in combating Islamophobia. And that is where the media is not self-reflective enough about what the deeply embedded biases and almost subconscious biases and assumptions that are deeply embedded in the broader U.S. American culture. So, in other words, no intention to be Islamophobic, but simply responding largely to general market dynamics. For instance, what does our readership want to hear from us? What do our viewers want to see from us? What do our listeners want to hear from us? That kind of thing, and sort of just trying to go about business as usual with great integrity, but neglecting to sort of ask difficult questions about whether or not whether or not we're helpful in being helpful in combating stereotypes and giving people good information, and whether or not we're sort of blindly still following the promptings of those deeply embedded biases. So the example of this for me, for instance, was the coverage in November of the horrific events in Mumbai. One of the things that was really disturbing to me, I was watching CNN coverage, and hundreds of people were dying, and for the first, I think it was almost 6 to 8 hours of CNN coverage, the dominant theme of the coverage was Americans and Europeans. How many Americans and Europeans are there? Were there 6? Were there 5? Who's there? And the message this sends, I think, perhaps on an unconscious level, subconscious level, to the American audience, is it reinforces their ideas that they're at the center of the world, and that in some way American life is more valuable or more precious or more important than the lives of other human beings. The message it sends to other people around the world, watching this kind of coverage, is just reinforcing their stereotypes about us, this kind of Occidentalism, this anti-Western mentality that's really the analog or the counterpart of Islamophobia in our own society. So right then and there, you didn't have any. I was just amazed that no one said, we've got to temper this, folks. This just doesn't sound right. And we also have to focus on the broader picture here. Yes, we're concerned about fellow Americans who might be there, but this is not an attack on U.S. soil. This is not primarily an attack against Americans, even if Americans are there. This is an attack that's happening within India. So maybe we need to give our viewers insight into the Indian situation here. What's going on? Why are some of these things happening? Without that kind of solipsistic focus that always goes back to the self, a concern with the self as the most important thing, and one's own culture as the most important thing. And a part of that was also the lack of coverage. So there was this intense coverage of the siege. And then, as some of you remember, these heinous events took place practically on the eve of one of the two of the most important Muslim festivals of the year. This would be Eid al-Adha, the feast of the sacrifice, commemorating the sacrifice of Abraham, and done in solidarity with the pilgrims who are on Hajj and who are celebrating. It falls on the 10th day of the last month of the Muslim year, Dhul-Hijjah. And it's usually a great celebratory day where families are celebrating coming together, and where there's a great emphasis on the care for the poor, because in many instances the sacrifices that are made, the meat is shared with people who don't normally have enough food, or who can't properly observe a festival because of their poverty. And what the Muslim community in Mumbai did was observe that great festival in deep solemnity.